I'm going to take my center back piece and place it, and I want to do my balance line at the shoulder line. Again, you don't necessarily have to have this. I just think it's a good practice to remember to do that on all the garments that you're draping. And so I'm adding in that squared off shoulder line so that I can make sure that I have my grain line really straight. And so I'm going to drape this center back by pinning it at the neck, the waistline, the shoulder. It also helps when you're going back and forth on the dress form that you're getting this in the same place that you originally had it. So I'm going to come down to my waistline. And again, the center back is going to be a little bit easier than the sides because we don't have as much curvature that we're working with. And we're going to take the back and we're just going to ease it over horizontally. Bring this down. There we go. Our back does have some curve to it. So you will see that this seam is not going to be a straight seam. It's going to have a curve to it. And I'm just going to ease everything over to the princess seam. And then I'll be marking that and trimming it down. And then the last step, of course, will be that side back. And again, it won't have as much curviness as the front. So I'm going to clip a couple of spots here to release that so that it can curve and this will get pushed out of the way. Your shoulder line may go slightly upwards because we're taking fullness that would be in the dart up here and we're transferring it into the seam. Remember when we did a basic bodice, we had a shoulder seam that was right on the princess line. So the excess fabric that would have made a dart here is now being pushed into this curved seam allowance. So in order to get up around the neck, again, I have to clip the neckline. Sometimes it's so hard to reach above your head and clip these. So there we go, all the way around. So I want to pin that neckline next to make sure that I've smoothed this out. Don't pull. I'm going to move that out of the way, come to the shoulder, come across the shoulder to that princess line, and then come down. So I can see I have a little bit too much fabric. I've got to sort of work it up into that shoulder area. But again, it doesn't have to be super tight. We want to make sure we have room for the person to move in the garment. So go ahead and trim your fabric away, and then we'll be ready for the side back. So we're going to mark our, or drape our side panel, and I want to keep my grain line like in the center of the panel. So your grain line should be like right about here. And I've gone ahead and also marked like a little horizontal balance line so that I can start in that area and try to keep this balanced. So I'm going to bring this part of the fabric up towards the shoulder. I'm just going to pin that grain line there, and I'm going to bring this down to the center of the waist. And I'm looking at it doing this because I want to make sure that I think I'm getting it straight. And you can see that gravity pulls it straight. So usually if you're just careful and press in on it, you'll maintain that grain line. And I'm going to pin it at the waist. I'm going to drape my shoulder and my neck area up here. So I'm bringing this up to the shoulder line and coming straight across to the arm. I'm going to pin it to my princess seam and just come down. In the area here under the arm, as we come around, we want to make sure that we remember to add some ease here too. So just, you know, come down and start working your fabric over to your princess line, you'll see there's a little fullness here. I'm going to go down here and do this part of the princess line, come down to the waist. A good thing to do at this point is to sort of release the fabric at the waistline so that you're able to have this wrap, and you can see how much it pops open, and come around here to your side seam. Just tack it in place. And then you want to look for where you need to cut away some fabric so that you can manipulate this piece without all this fabric in your way. So we're going to trim some fabric away at the waistline. So I'm going across, get rid of all of that. This is a messy job, isn't it? There's fabric on the floor. It's all over the place. I'm going to add a couple more clips because they're very curvy at the waist. I'm going to come up here and remove some fabric on the princess seam so that I can see if I'm getting any wrinkling. Okay, I'm going to come across the shoulder in the front and leave myself, maybe a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of seam allowance. I can take a little bit more off of here. There. Okay. So now we can see that it's going to drape a little bit better. So you're going to have a little bit of easing here. Not a lot, but a little bit. And so you're going to pin that in. We're going to be doing some notching again in the back area. So I'm going to kind of just ease this over and down. And I'm overlapping. Some people like to fold this back out of the way. I sort of like to overlap so I can see where the seam line was that I created underneath so that I can duplicate it. In this area at the waist, I'm going to pinch in just a tiny bit of wearing ease. On your little dress form, it's not going to really be much more than 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to continue to smooth this up there. I see that I need to maybe bring this way a little bit more, that there's too much easing here, so you can sort of move that shoulder line over a little bit more and it will take some of that away. And then we've got just a slight amount of ease in the armhole, so just sort of feel it, make sure that you're not getting that too tight. And really basically where you're at the underarm, I'm coming down and I'm going to mark the space below the underarm. So on your 1/2 scale, about 1/4 of an inch here, I've got this. So I want to add ease. So I'm going to move my side seam. Oh, maybe not even much more than 1/4 of an inch. You can see that you'll get ripples if you do too much. But I'm going to give myself a little extra space under the arm so that this isn't too tight. And then I'm really adding it into my side seam. What winds up happening is you're adding sort of a little long elongated triangle in that area that you're wearing. So you can see that it's not flopping, but it's not like skin tight. If you see any horizontal lines in your drape, then you have it pulled just way too tight. And I'm going to cut a little bit of this fabric away in the arm's eye area so that you can see where that is. And the next thing you're going to do is just go ahead and mark all your seams, waistline. In the area over here, you might want to add a notch, just to remind yourself of where this is coming together. So here's one. So I usually tend to do it sort of above the shoulder line and somewhere near the bust line to make sure that I'm getting this positioned correctly. So go ahead and mark this piece, and then you're going to take all your pieces off of the dress form, and then we're going to true it up, pin it together, and put it back on to make sure that it fits before we move on to a paper pattern. So we've removed our pattern pieces and we're going to true them up. Most likely what you're going to need is a see-through plastic ruler. You're going to need a ruler that has a slight curve for at the waistline. And if you have the armhole ruler or a French curve to do your neckline and your armholes. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to do my shoulders first. So I'm drawing a straight line across the shoulders. It's okay to have your line extend beyond your seam allowance so that you really see the intersection there. So let me lay these next to each other in order. So here's your center front. I'm going to go straight across my shoulder on my side front, my side back, that shoulder line. And I can see that mine's kind of done a little dipping here. So I'm just hoping I'm going to get it quite right. We can always adjust it later on when we put it back on the dress form. And then my center back. So this is my side front, no, side back, and my center back. Somehow I lost those markings when I cut off the seam allowance. So on your center back, make sure that you create, let's see, can you see that? What am I seeing? Whoops. No, the neckline. Okay. The armhole curve works pretty good at connecting your neckline. And this ruler does a pretty good job of areas that are straight or slightly curvy. So I'm going to connect those with this ruler. And sometimes your area up here is just a little bit of a curve over your shoulder blade. So I'm going to use this end of my ruler to create that curve. There we go. Make sure that you can see where your notches are so that when you pin it together, you're lining up the notches. So that's my center back. Here's my side back. I'm going to use the ruler here to mark my waistline. My side seam seems to have a bit of a curve to it, so I'm going to manipulate the ruler from one point to that one, and then it needs to come back in under the arm, like right about there. So there's my side seam. My center back seam at the lower part of the body is going to have a tendency to be kind of on the straight side, but as we get up towards the shoulder blade, you can see that it starts to curve. So I'm going to curve this, and I'm going to continue with manipulating the ruler so that I get that right curve. So let's try for that. Remember, you've pinned this on a dress form, and you don't have to maintain a line that seems out of alignment with a nice seam. You don't want a seam that's doing this because you're being rigid about where you put those marks. There's going to be some adjustments in the marks that you had on your dress form. Here, I'm going to create my armhole. So I'm going to come down to there, and then I needed to move this a little bit and come across. Under the arm, you don't want it to go down and create a point. So most of the time what I do is, you know, when you come across at the seam, that's almost like a straight line under there. And you'll see it when you pin it together if it does one of these kinds of things where it's going up and making a point. That whole part doesn't seem to make sense, and so you'll need to make an adjustment. I can use probably this part of my ruler, like right about there, to create my waistline. My underarm is maybe right here like this. Once you've made a lot of patterns, you kind of know exactly what that should look like, and you can tell if it looks wonky. Okay, so there's my armhole at the back, and then this seam is really curvy, so we want to be really careful that we don't take away that area. This is where the bust is projecting out under the arm, and we need to make sure that we've left enough fabric. So I'm going to manipulate my ruler to kind of follow these lines here, and then here I'm going to flip it over as it's coming up to the bust. I've got to figure out what that curve is. So here's the center of my bust. Here it is going under. It's better right now to err on the side of making it a little bit too big because we can pinch it out. Then if you make it too small, it's a little bit more difficult to manipulate. So I'm coming around here, and I'm going to bring it up this way. So like I said before, there's no one way that I'm going to say to you, oh, you have to use that particular ruler. It's how you move the rulers and manipulate the shapes that you're trying to create. So here, I find sometimes that this ruler works really good to come up here above the bust. And I need to come over a bit because I want to make sure that I don't make this too tight above the bust. You know, we're fleshy up there and we don't want to like flatten everything out and have it be really uncomfortable. Again, my side seam has a little bit of a curve to it, so we're going to try to manipulate the ruler to follow. Here's where I've added my wearing ease, so instead of going to this point, I want to bring this out a little bit and follow that line where I've added the wearing ease. So I'm going to bring that down to here. So again, you can see I'm not trying to follow exactly every mark. I'm trying to create a seam with those being sort of landmarks. So the next step is you're going to pin everything together and make sure that it fits your dress form. So basically you're going to take your, let's see, let me take my side back. And when I go to pin, I'm going to fold one of the seams over and I'm going to pin it in place. Make sure you're matching up your notches. Before you do this, you want to trim everything so that you have basically a 1/2 inch. Otherwise, it's going to restrict doing the fit. So let's pin this together, and then I will see you back on the form with putting this back on the dress form. One of the items that I want to point out, and when you're truing up your bodice, is to make sure that in this area where your princess line intersects the shoulder, that should line up all 4 points. If this is over some or over this way, it's going to look really awful because they're not intersecting each other. You want to make sure that the point at the sleeve matches up and then the point at the neck. So you can see here in my sample that I've had to move the neckline over a little bit less than 1/4 inch to make sure that I don't have my shoulder seam too long and my corners are all lining up here. If they don't line up, then you've got to make an adjustment in your seam that it's going to go one way or the other. At this point, when you're pinning it on the, or you're putting it together and you're putting it on the dress form, if this isn't lining up, you want to make sure that you correct that in your pattern, that those will all intersect. So we're going to get ready to put this on the dress form and see. Okay, so we have our pattern back on the dress form, and you can see that everything lines up where it should. If this is grainy, I apologize because I've turned off the lights so you can actually see the lines. And you can see that my armhole looks pretty good, but I do have some wearing ease here. This is there's a little bit of looseness here. We don't want it so tight that someone can't move. And so now that everything's lined up really well, you can go ahead and you can transfer your pattern to paper. So make sure that you look at that video from the basic bodice and how to transfer the pattern. I don't think that I need to make a video about transferring to paper for each thing that we drape. On your pattern, make sure that you've labeled it, that you have your grain line. Your grain line should be 1 inch from the center front, 1 inch from the center back. But when it comes to your front and your side, the grain line is this area where we had that drawn on the fabric. So you want to duplicate that as your grain line. We know that this looks really balanced and that the grain is okay in our model, so we want that to be carried over to our pattern. Make sure that you're marking your notches, and then make sure you add a 1/2 inch seam all the way around. And then what you're going to do next is you're going to cut out your pattern. So your center front will be cut on a fold. So we won't see a line down the center front. You can draw a line there if you want to know where the center front is. And when we get around to the back, you're going to just mark the line for where the seam allowance is on the center back. And then you're going to flip it under, and then you're just going to pin it like this. You don't want to sew this because you will not be able to get it on your dress form. And as far as like your armhole and your neckline, transfer the markings so I can see those when you take your photograph. You will have to clip your seams, especially in the neck area and the waist area. Do not turn these under and stitch them. You are not making a finished garment. You are making what's called a toile. So once that's made, you would have a client that you would put this on and you would fit them. So we don't have anything attached here. We don't need to turn this under and try to make a finished garment. It's a garment that's for fitting. So good luck finishing this. Photograph everything and upload it to the assignment in the portal.